I spent 30 years trying to understand what made Hank Williams who he was. And the answer kept leading me back to the same place. Hank wasn't just Hank Williams. He was a type, a template, so to speak, a story this country keeps telling itself. And the next time it told that story, the man's name was Elvis Presley. Today I want to show you that Hank Williams and Elvis Presley weren't just similar. In almost every way that matters, they were the same man. Hey everybody, welcome back to Highway to Hank. I am your host, Jason Petty, and I've been portraying Hank Williams for 30 years on stages all over the world in the play Lost Highway, the Ryman Auditorium. I was there for 2 years, off-Broadway, where I won the Obie Award for Best Actor, and I have since been doing my own shows about Hank and classic country music. If you want to check out any of that information, go to my website, jasonpetty.com. Today we're going to explore the eerily haunting similarities between Hank Williams Sr. and Elvis Presley. And before we get started, I would ask you, if you like content like this, please go down and hit the like button and the subscribe button. It's free, there's no obligation, and share this to friends you think would like it. Now, as an actor trying to portray Hank Williams, first thing you want to do is get inside the character's head. And you read all the biographies, and you talk to all the people who knew him, and you go through all the analysis of Hank's psychology. And in doing so, you sort of develop a feeling for the human, not the legend, not the singer, not the entertainer, not the on-air guy, but the guy in his quiet moments. You know, I would ask questions of people who knew him, like Don Helms. It was like, how did Hank Williams laugh? What did his laugh sound like? What did he think was funny? What did he think was sad? Did he ever talk about his sadness? And of course, the answer was no, because back in those days, you just didn't talk about it. You just dealt with it, sucked it up, and dealt with it on your own. So I got to thinking as I went on. It also suffices to say that I'm a huge Elvis Presley fan. I was an Elvis Presley fan before I was a Hank Williams fan. The first album my mother ever bought me was called Elvis Country. And I had a little turntable. And I loved that album so much. And of course, it's very ironic that here I am some 170 years later in my life. I still have that album. It's all scratched up and you can't hear it. It's made of flimsy. You can take it and almost use it as a frisbee. But also one of the albums that I got when I was a kid was Hank Williams' Greatest Hits. And so I listened to those on a turntable, which is the only real way to listen to the old music, the early Hank and Elvis stuff. And if you're interested, I would ask you to please go down and check out my store. It's in the description. There I have the best Hank Williams biographies that I've read, Hank Williams CD sets, but also Hank on vinyl. And an amazing find was a little RCA Victrola record player facsimile. You know, it's not the old type that cost an arm and a leg. This is less than $100, and it's amazing. It's got Victrola written across it. It's pretty cool. It's also down in the store. Check that out, and just know that if you do buy it from my link, I do make a little bit of money, and I need to make a little bit of money because Hank tribute artists, if you find one who says he's rich, he's lying. That's how you tell how a Hank tribute artist is lying. He says he's rich. I know it from a fact. But I love what I do, and I have done it for 30 years. And, you know, I'm very grateful for Hank Williams and his music. So Actually, I married a girl who loves Elvis as much as me, maybe more so. And I told her to pick the place where we get married, and she picked Graceland Mansion in Memphis, Tennessee. So that's where we got married, in Graceland, 2002. It's been an amazing ride. I still love her with all my heart. So, uh, but I started thinking about Hank Williams and Elvis Presley, and in the little, you know, spring started to click and everything, and I was like, wait a minute, it's the same story. Hank Williams' story and Elvis Presley's story are basically the same story. Elvis was just a phenomenon. I mean, he was a popular phenomenon. Hank was sort of in the country genre. He did cross pop lines and things like that, but Elvis was in that pop. He just went nuts. But Hank did too in the country scene, early days. So I want to start off by listing a few things that are eerily similar between the two. First of all, they're both poor Southern white trash. That's how they were born. Now we call them hillbillies. I was kind of born the same way. I was a little bit more middle class, but I was raised on a farm, on my grandparents' farm, and they were poor. And so we went to a small church that only had 18 members. So I know where that's coming from. Well, Hank was born in Mount Olive, Alabama, uh, and Elvis was born in Tupelo, Mississippi. So they both always, people looked down at them because they were so poor. These kids barely could afford any kind of shoes, ragged hand-me-down clothes, things like that. So that got into them as they were kids. They both had dominant mother figures. For Hank, it was Mama Lily. And I'll probably put up a picture of her right now because you can see she was not what my grandmother would call a big woman, but she was stout. And she ruled with an iron fist. But she loved Hank and she doted on Hank and always supported him in everything that he did. And so he kind of latched onto his mom because his father, Lon, who was a World War I veteran, had uh, got the shakes. They called it shell shock back in those days, but it's called PTSD now. And he was away from the family a lot, you know, uh, hospitalized and things like that. And so Elvis's mom was Gladys, and she was married to Vernon, and they had twin boys, Elvis Aaron Presley and Jesse Garon Presley. Well, Jesse Garon, I believe I think he was stillborn, or either he died shortly after birth. So that left only Elvis, and he was an only child. And of course, his mama doted on him and approved of everything he did. So they both had strong, dominant mother figures in their background, which may have contributed to their inability to have a good relationship with women later on in life, because both Hank and Elvis went through divorces and had women troubles. Fame was a big part of that too, because the temptations were always there. But the doting mothers, the dominant mother figures, probably had a little bit to do with that as well. They both also were raised in churches, and they had a strong Christian upbringing. They both loved spiritual music. Hank wrote a ton of spiritual songs. Um, and Elvis, the only two Grammys I think that Elvis ever won were for his gospel albums, How Great Thou Art, and Crying in the Chapel, things like that. Of course, Hank wrote I Saw the Light and many, many others. But anyway, they both had a very strong spiritual upbringing. Both of them also got interested in music at a very, very young age. Uh, Hank loved the blues. He loved listening to country radio. Like back then, they didn't call it country; it was hillbilly and folk music. He liked listening to the Grand Ole Opry, and his heroes were Roy Acuff and Ernest Tubb and Jimmy Rogers and the Carter family, people like that. Um, Elvis was a huge Hank Williams fan. I mean, a huge Hank Williams fan. As a matter of fact, in one of Elvis's concerts, My dad had an old 8-track tape in the car when I was a kid of Elvis Aloha from Hawaii. And in it, I always remembered him saying, I'd like to sing for you now what I think is probably the saddest song I've ever heard. And it was Hank Williams' I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry. So he was a huge Hank Williams fan. But they both loved the blues. They were both uh, lovers of blues music. That's Southern black blues music. As a matter of fact, the only musical learning that Hank ever got was at the foot of a black blues street musician by the name of T-Tot, Rufus Payne. Elvis used to wander over to the other side of the tracks as a kid, stand outside the black churches and listen to them. And he would tell his friends, I want to sing like that. And basically, Sam Phillips, when he discovered Elvis, said he was looking for a white boy who could sing black music. And that's exactly what Elvis was. Now, granted, they were a lot of white singers who sang the blues, but Hank and Elvis seemed to have it infused into their veins. They could interpret a blues song differently, where it would hit you differently. So they both had strong roots in gospel music and in blues music. And at young ages, they both entered talent shows. And that was the divine spark that started them in the music business. That was the trigger point. Now, it took a while for both of them. But Elvis at age 10 entered, I think, into the county fair or the state fair in Tupelo, Mississippi, and he sang Old Shep, which is an old Red Foley song about a dog that has to be put down and makes the kid sad. But Elvis sang it. He didn't win, but he did. He came in like, some people say second, some people say fifth, but he got $5 worth of fair ride tickets as his prize. And Hank won his talent show with an original song that he had written called the WPA Blues. Remember, this was during the Depression, and the WPA was one of the New Deal, Roosevelt's New Deal packages. So he won $15, which was a heck of a lot of money for back then. And that sort of sparked them both. Now, both started their careers very young, and both skyrocketed to fame. As soon as they hit the charts, it seemed to just explode. People were waiting for someone, and Hank and Elvis both came along. They both had a raw sexual energy that no one had ever seen from a white singer, back in those days. And people, it was kind of either you loved it or you hated it back in those days. And same for Hank. Hank had this knee bobble he would do, and he'd bounce up and down. No one in country music was moving on stage, but Hank was. And women would faint when Hank would do that little shimmy and that little knee bobble thing that he did. Now, of course, Elvis, to say the least, those swiveling hips, those made more women faint than you can count. I mean, it was pretty amazing, the effect, the sexual raw energy effect that Elvis had. Well, they both had it. And that's another similarity. They both helped create a new genre of music. Now, Hank, it was called hillbilly and folk music and mountain music, and it didn't have a direction. Hank really came in and helped define the direction of country music. And they started calling it country music after Hank Williams. His songwriting, his singing about common everyday problems that everyone could relate to, that sort of is what country music is about. When you say, singing about your tractor and your dog dying and, mama and everything else, that's Hank. That's what Hank did. Drinking songs, church songs, crying songs, hurting songs. That was Hank Williams. But Hank also introduced the world to this honky-tonk sound, which was a predecessor to rockabilly, which is what influenced Elvis Presley. Elvis came along, and there was a few rockabillys out there, but he loved country music. and he loved blues music and gospel music and rockabilly. So he sort of sparked what they now call rock and roll. And they started calling it rock and roll after Elvis. So both of them were at the very beginnings of a genre of music. They both had father figure managers. Um, Hank's father figure manager was Fred Rose. Fred was a big Tin Pan Alley songwriter. He had written Fly Trouble and many, many other songs. But uh, he's the one that guided Hank's career, and very carefully. He also helped Hank shape his songs. He would never take credit. He would never take songwriting credit, because he always said Hank was the man that brought the talent. I was the guy that just kind of, shaped things up a little bit. And that's what he did. Different melodies, and hey, let's put a chord, let's put a bridge here or something. And Hank loved him so much, he started calling him Pappy, Pappy Rose. He was like a father, second father figure to him. Elvis had Colonel Tom Parker. And that was a little bit different relationship, but Elvis still admired him, and Elvis was very loyal to him. Say what you want about Colonel Tom Parker and the choices that he made for Elvis, especially with the movies. There was a point in time where Colonel Tom Parker wanted to do a Hank Williams biographical movie starring Elvis Presley. Now, I would have given my left arm to have seen that movie if they ever made it. But as most things, it didn't come to fruition. But that's another similarity. They both had father figure managers. The most important thing, I think, for both of those guys, they both had a darkness in them, a loneliness. If you ever seen the movie Tombstone, Doc Holliday, they asked him what's wrong with this guy, and he said he was born with a great big hole in him, and no amount of killing, or money, or any of that stuff could fill it. I think that's Hank and Elvis. It's true of many great artists. You go back to Beethoven and Van Gogh and people like that. They seem to have that. It's almost a depressed state, an introspective state. No amount of alcohol or pills, fame, money, women could fill that hole. They both had it. It shows up in Hank Williams' songwriting and in his voice. It shows up in Elvis's voice. You can feel it. You can read about it in the Elvis biographies. He just had this sense of, I know he was reading a lot of life after death books. He was very interested in life after death. I think they both had premonitions that they weren't going to make it to be very old. They both had very sad final year or so. Hank, especially with the final year, he had the operation on his back. He began to drink very heavily to curb the pain. He started to take prescription medications like chloral hydrate, morphine, things like that, and that just tore him up. Elvis had pills, prescription medications, uppers, downers, things like that, and they just tore him up. They both had what I call quack doctors. Elvis had Dr. Nicopolis, which they called him Dr. Nick. He was a bona fide physician, and I think he lost his license because he was prescribing too many pills for Elvis. I think he has passed away now, but he lost his license. And there's both sides to that story, because I know he's Elvis Presley, okay? It's like the Michael Jackson story. It's like, what's a doctor to do? They become friends with this person, and this person's a larger than life figure. And I get it. Do the right thing. They should have done the right thing. Dr. Nick should have done the right thing. He didn't. Elvis paid the price. That's the way it goes. Hank had a quack doctor. His name was Toby Marshall. He wasn't a real doctor. He had paid for a license without having to go through doctor school. Back in those days, you could do that. I think you got it back of a comic book or so. I have no idea. But he got it, and he was able to prescribe medication. And he just went nuts because Hank, of course, was paying him. So he gave Hank basically lethal doses of morphine and chloral hydrate, and that caused Hank's heart to become enlarged, and eventually everyone dies of heart failure. Your heart stops beating. And that's what happened to Hank. His heart just collapsed. Or as Don Helms, his best friend, said, in reality, Hank died of a broken heart. Broken from what? Loneliness, desperation, addiction, that hole in his soul. Same with Elvis. I think Elvis had a broken heart there at the end too. Uh, it's just a very, very sad, sad ending for both of these guys. And that's the other thing. They both died young, basically of their own doing. Now, they didn't commit the deed knowingly, but maybe subconsciously. What they were doing led to their demise. And that was another thing. They both were some other things, they both performed on the Louisiana Hayride, that's another thing. A lot of people did, but Hank got there right after it had opened. It opened in 1948 in April, and Hank joined in August of 1948. Elvis came along later, I think in 54, 55, somewhere in that, maybe 56. But the Louisiana Hayride was a great jumpstart for both of them. But the other thing was that both of their deaths made them into mythical legends. It surpassed normal fame when they died unexpectedly at young ages. Elvis was 42, Hank was 29, and Hank sold more records in the year after his death than he had in all the previous years before his death. Elvis was the same way. He sold more records after he died than he did while he was alive. It's kind of what America does. It's that dream. It's the dream of coming from poverty, giving a talent from God, using it to become rich and famous. But there's a downside to being rich and famous. There's pressure, there's fame, there's temptations, there's weasels, there's people that want to bilk you out of all your money. There's people who just want to be your friends because you're famous. And that's what Hank was wary of there at the end. Elvis was the same way. That's why they kept a close circle of friends. Elvis had the Memphis Mafia. Hank had his Drifting Cowboys, his band, and his close set of friends. And they all saw it. They saw both of them in decline. Elvis's people wrote a book right before his death, What Happened to Elvis or something like that. I can't remember what it's called, but it was, and Elvis got angry. He felt they were disloyal and he fired them from the Memphis Mafia. So people were trying to get Hank to change, and they were both too far gone. But anyway, those are some of the similarities. Are they the same man? Well, I gotta say, it's the same story, different man. But the fact that they were both poor white trash kids with domineering mamas, learning at the feet of black blues musicians, creating a new genre of music, skyrocketing to fame, then that loneliness and darkness comes back in and they become addicted to something, prescription pills or alcohol. They die young, and now they're mythical legends. That's what we do, and that's that story. So right now I want to sing you the song that sparked my interest in Hank Williams in the beginning. Elvis sang it in Aloha from Hawaii. It's I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry.
Hear that lonesome whippoorwill. He sounds too blue to fly. The I'm so lonesome I could cry. Did you ever see a robin weep when leaves begin to die? Like me, he's lost the will to live. I'm so lonesome I could cry. The silence of a falling star lights up a purple sky. And as I wonder where you are, I'm so lonesome I could cry.
All right, there you go. I'm so lonesome I could cry. One of the greatest sad songs of all time, and was voted, I think, in the top 100 country songs of all time. Sang by both Hank Williams, who wrote it, and Elvis Presley, who it touched very, very deeply. Folks, I do really appreciate y'all showing up for these shows. Thank you so very much. Please go down and check out our store down in the description. There's lots of great Hank Williams things down there. And there's that record player, which is just freaking amazing. But the albums, the Hank albums, the vinyl is the only way I think to listen. But if you still got those CD players or things like that, check out our store. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, be a part of the channel. We really do appreciate it. Share it with your friends who you think would like it. And if the good Lord's willing and the creeks don't rise, we'll see you for too long.